Okay, so your first little project is to create an adventure game. And we just learned about loops and if statements in the previous video. And now I'm going to show you how to create functions and how to use loops and if statements, mostly if statements, but loops also, to in the context of an adventure game. So I have started an adventure game here. There's not a lot to it. And what you're going to create is going to be fairly simple. It takes a little bit more complex computer science concepts to make this really complicated, so don't get too bogged down in the details. We're just going to create something pretty straightforward to start with. And then later, if you want to do something more complicated in a final project, you absolutely can do that. So you'll notice up here at the top of the screen, I have two things that you've probably never seen before. These are called functions, and they start with the three letters def, which stands for define. And then you name your function, which is just like any other variable. And the only difference between this and, say, assigning a number to a variable is that we have these parentheses after it, which just gives us, tells us that this is going to do something. Now, when we get more complicated, there are actually things that you can put inside of these parentheses, but we're not going to do that right now. We're not going to worry about that. And all these functions do right now is print things out. But you can put anything. You can put whole programs. You can put programs that are 200 lines long inside of these functions. So this is your starting function. So I defined a function called the menu, which prints out what your options are. And then I've defined an east here. I obviously should define west, south, and north, but I haven't done that yet. And then down here is where you run those functions, and where what you call it in computer science is you call a function. So I start out by calling the menu function, and then I assign a variable to an input where you're gonna choose one of these options, and then depending on what you choose, I'm going to run another function. So you can imagine I would have, if I continued this, I would have something like if direction is equal to 2, then I would run west, which doesn't exist yet. And then we would have one for every direction. So that's essentially the basics of how you would create this series of instructions. Now, it can get complicated because, of course, once you go north, south, east, or west, you might have different options. Don't get too crazy about that. A more sophisticated programmer might do something really complicated. If you want to create, for example, once you've gotten to the river, let's say you go east, and then your choices are, at that point, maybe at this point, we can add to this. We could cross the river, or we could go back, and maybe those are our only options. And this is the cool thing about writing a program. I mean, maybe in real life, of course, you could cross the river, you could continue, you could turn to go to the north or south, which would take you in different directions, or you go back west, which is where we came from. We came from the west. And but since you're the programmer, you get to say, well, you know what? I don't want to build all those options in. I don't want to build in what happens if you go north at the river instead of going across the river or going back. So you just give them two options. So, and in fact, just to make life easier, I'm going to put in the numbers here. I always find that to be easier when you're asking people, so all they have to type in is a number. So, and then what you might do is you would have a definition for cross the river. So if they cross the river, maybe they get eaten by an alligator. And I'll show you something cool that you can do in just a second. where you might have some options here. Okay, so here we go. Let's run this and then we'll talk about how to create some structure for this. So all a function is a series of instructions. So this way, you know, I don't have to run this, I don't have to print all of these lines out every single time. I can just run menu at this point. So I'm going to run this, and you can see over here, it says you are in a cool meadow, what do you want to do? I'm going to go east since that's the only option I have, so I put in 1, and now you can see that it's run that, and it's asking me that it's telling me I see a river, and it wants to know what I want to do at that point. Well, you'll notice that I don't have, the program just ends. So what you can do, you can put this into east. So let's say option equals input choice. Make it simple. And then we can say if option is equal to 1, where we cross the river, we're actually going to run the cross the river function. And this is the cool thing. Now if the option is equal to number 2, any ideas what you might do? You're actually going to run the menu option again because you're back at the beginning. And this way, I don't have to type the entire menu in. I just run that function and voila, I'm back where I started again. So let's try this and see how it works. So we get our first option, and we want to go east, and it's asking us what we want to do at this point. Let's go across the river. Okay, we got eaten by an alligator, so it crossed the river. So let's try that again. All right, we want to go to the east. That's our only option. Now let's say we want to go back. Well, it runs the menu again, but it doesn't give us an option. And that's because we don't have an input thing down here. So we put that at the beginning, but maybe what we want to do is put it inside of here. Okay. So that means every time we go back from one point, it will always take our input. Now, the thing that we have to do, this is a little bit complicated, but it's not that hard, I promise. So what we have to do is, these functions are like a box. Things go into them and things come out of them. This function right here, our east function, actually all of our functions right now, they just do something. Nothing comes out of them, nothing goes into them. But if we want to be able to see where we're going, we want this piece right here that we want to know what the person chooses, and that needs to go in other places. Because right now, down here, we've run menu, and it's going to yell at us and say it doesn't know what direction is. So let's just demonstrate that. So it asks me what direction, but then it yells at me because direction is not defined, which it isn't. It's defined inside of menu, but nowhere else. It's not defined out here. There's an easy fix for that. We're going to return direction. So what that says is take whatever comes in here and spit it back out into the world so that you can use it. And then we need to say, okay, that's out there in the world, I need to capture it. So I'm going to assign direction to this function. So all this does, and this is a very, very common construction, all this does is says whatever gets returned from menu, could be a number, could be a string, we don't know, assign it to this direction. And then direction will be defined and it will do its thing. So let me define one more thing for us so that we have east defined so that we can just see a little bit more of this in action. So let's say we go to the west, and if we go to the west, let's say there's a mountain. And your options here might be to climb it or whatever. I'm not going to put all of those in. I'm just going to give us some more to choose from. So we're going to run this again. And now that we have direction assigned, we should be able to put anything in. Let's go to the west since we just put that. And it just tells us there's a mountain ahead. So we got no errors, so everything worked out very nicely. Now let's go to the east. And we want to go across the river. And we get eaten by an alligator. So obviously we die. So this is how your adventure game is going to work and going to work well. So your basic game construction looks like this. You're going to define some functions. You're going to get input. You're going to have to return something probably from your functions. And you're going to then determine what happens based on those functions. And the easiest thing to do, this is going to be your main menu thing, will probably be your most complicated function, just in terms of getting your input and returning the input. The rest of them are going to look a little bit like this. You're going to have, you know, you do this and this happens. You take an input from within this function, and then if that happens, and that keeps it kind of straight, so that if you've gone to the east, then you have these options, and this happens based on those options. And if you go back to the main place, then you are running other functions, and you can create a bunch of different functions. So I hope that makes some sense, and we'll get started on that in class next time. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a head start so you can start thinking about the main thing. The fun part is figuring out what you want your adventure story to look like.